My Italian granddad, who is pictured behind me, his name is Leo Mascioli, and Leo had come over to this continent in 1886, and he ended up in the porcupine camp, which is Timmins, and he walked in 1908 with a pack on his back in the middle of winter. And after working in the mine, he decided there was going to be a community there someday, so he set up a construction company and started building. And he built all his life, the Empire Hotels and many theaters and bowling alleys throughout the whole north. On the 10th of June 1940, Mussolini entered the war on the side of the Axis powers, and on that day the Canadian government imprisoned many Italians. Some they only fingerprinted and let them go, but they had to report once a week to the police station. But some they imprisoned for up to 5 years. My granddad and his brother, my great-uncle Tony, were two of the people that were imprisoned. And they were kept there for about 3/4 of a year, starting in June 1940. And what was their crime? They were accused of being fascists because, of course, they had Italian names. They were never charged with anything, never convicted with anything. The crime was having the wrong name at the wrong time in history. It was very devastating. They were humiliated, and there was great fear that there would be repercussions. Indeed, during that time in Timmins, I can only speak of Timmins, there were Italians being beaten up in the streets, and the RCMP would kick down your door at 1 in the morning and fuss up the people and mess up the homes and do it again the next week and the next week and the next week to keep you fearful in the Italian community. It worked very well. Most Italians walked physically with their head held down during those war years. You might not be familiar with the fifth column. That was one of the big engines that drove this whole thing. The fifth column. A column is a huge, massive group of armed men. We had a column in Western Europe. We had a column in Eastern Europe, which would be the Soviet. That's where there was another battlefront. We had a column in Africa. We had a column in the Pacific. So what's the fifth column? It was a whispering campaign. The fifth column was that on the day when Hitler wins the war in Europe, he had people planted all over the world, and they would come out of their hiding and take over. So who most likely would be in that fifth column? It would probably be people who we were at war with at the time, the Italians and the Germans and the Japanese. And the interesting thing is that they never imprisoned the Germans.
What happened to your granddad? When did he get released, and what did he do for the remainder of his life?
Granddad and his brother, after a tribunal hearing, 40 businessmen came from Timmins to Petawawa to speak on his behalf. And he was released after about 3/4 of a year. And he came home to Timmins, and he'd been home about 3 weeks. And he was walking down the main street of Timmins, and he saw Joe Smith walking up the sidewalk towards him. And Granddad thought, oh, good, I haven't seen Joe in so long. It'll be nice to chat with him. And Joe crossed the street to get away from him. And Granddad realized at that moment how much harm had been done. And you can't undo that. And he decided to move away from his Timmins, and he moved to Toronto, and he came back regularly. He was a contractor all his life, and he kept building and making things and doing things. He was a very active man, and he didn't lose his spirit. It was indomitable. But the pain of that particular moment on 3rd Avenue lived with him, and he knew then he couldn't overcome it. And many Italians after the event moved away from their community to start fresh somewhere else. Now, everybody knew Leo, but it was a significantly painful time. There's no question.